All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to another episode of the Offer Owner Spotlight Series. Sitting down with Josh Troy here. Someone actually got the pleasure of hearing speak at an event in Dallas a couple months ago. And Josh Troy here has incredible results in high ticket sales. We are just talking how annually they're doing tens of millions of dollars across the multiple offers his teams are selling on. And so this is going to be a great conversation. We're going to go deep into use of webinars and just high ticket and financial models, which is a huge thing that a lot of people miss. And so, Josh, I appreciate you being here. Excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. Financial models is my love language, so
Would you?
happy to get into it.
You talk about financial models so much in numbers, a lot more than most sales guys or people who are in sales do. Like most
Yeah.
guys who are in sales are like objections and freaking whatever, but you're like numbers. When did that
Mhm.
start? And like, would you say that you're better at numbers than you are at sales? Like, what is your strong suit? Why? What makes you guys so good? How are you able to push tens of millions of dollars when you're over here talking like numbers? And these guys are more so hardcore. Like,
Yeah.
how's that possible?
Yeah. There's a few questions in there, and I'll try to unpack them. First of all, I believe in building a business in a spreadsheet. I've been that way for as long as I can remember, but if I'm trying to peg it, 6 or 7 years ago, when
Mm,
I had a first business that really started getting momentum, I just felt like I lacked so much clarity without it. So for me, it was just a way to make sense of things. It took away a lot of the anxiety of scaling and not having proper visibility, which is why I really started diving into it. Um, whether I'm better at financial models or sales, that would be a fun debate for a full episode. I mean, I started a sales agency because I'm gifted in sales. I always
yeah.
have been. Sales is my passion.
Mm,
But what I think you're really getting at, which I think that people are going to really enjoy about this episode, is there is a really big difference between sales and sales operations.
mm,
And I spend most of my time talking about sales operations. I don't want to
mm.
talk about sales training and objection handling and all
Yeah.
of this stuff. Really important, but that stuff's table stakes, man. If people want to really scale a big business, you got to get really good at the operations side. So that's where I like to
Yeah.
spend my time talking about.
That's great. Now, you say build a business in a spreadsheet. I know when you had talked at the event, and it stuck with me. You talked about best case, mapping out the best case, the
Hmm.
base case, and the worst case
That's right,
situation
bear
for the
case.
business. Do you want to break that down on what it looks like? And then I have a follow up question to that as well, just more tactical for people who want to actually apply that. What is that model, and how do you use it,
Yeah. Is it okay if I take it a step before that?
bro? Yeah,
Because
do bro. We're chilling. Just do it wherever you want to go. Yeah,
yeah, let's almost talk about like kind of the purpose of
yeah,
financial models and why I'm so obsessed with them. Because when I say build your business in a spreadsheet, let me define that.
yeah.
What I mean is that you can literally see what your company would look like at different levels of scale based on a certain set of assumptions. And
Mm.
the reason I think that's important is because companies don't know that. So it prevents them from taking the right action at the right time, which really slows down scale. Here's the most basic of examples I could come up with. Let's say that you want to scale to a million a month, whatever. Or actually, let's even start from like a 0 to 1 motion. If you're on a call funnel, if you have a sales rep that can take 8 average calls a day, then every 8 calls, let's say the average call is $200 on a call funnel.
Yep.
They can take 8 calls a day. There's 22 working days in a month. That's 176 calls. That would be the rep capacity. Well, if
Mm,
you're paying $200 a call, that means every 35,000 in spend, you need another rep,
mm,
right? So what I what happens is it gives you this clarity and you can start understanding not only your targets and your benchmarks but how you need to operationally move to hit that
mm.
level of scale. When people are like, I want $1 million a month, well, how many reps is that? How many
Yeah, yeah,
closers, how
yeah.
many setters, and what are you doing to be able to track that?
It's
So
true.
that's why I love the financial models. When it comes to best case, base case, and I actually call it bear case, which
Mm,
it does mean worst case, but there's a
mm,
slight difference. Worst case technically could be like, our freaking state got hit with an asteroid and we're out of business. It's not a worst case could be technically unrealistic. So bear case is like the realistic worst case scenario that's not using catastrophic thinking. And so it's like, this is still realistic, but it would mean we're underperforming. Best case, base case, bear case. And so that what you were referring to is that's how I build these financial models, and that's how I look at these forecasts.
Yeah.
Because again, it gives me agility.
Yeah.
Why do I like it so much? Not only does it remove anxiety, it gives me clarity, but it gives me speed. Because if I'm building a reinvestment strategy and I'm ramping a sales team, and I have a performance delta that makes my revenue swing 10, 20%, whatever it is, I am confident I could still invest in these things and hire these people without it actually affecting me. When people don't have that visibility, they scale up, they scale down, they hire
Yeah.
reps, they lay off reps, and it's
True.
just not a good way to smoothly scale a business.
Yeah, I think about there's a company I know, they were doing 10 million a year, pretty big in our space, and they closed down their business because they didn't have the financial model mapped out, and then they had people telling them like, oh, charge more, and then have this guarantee and like this refund thing, and then they weren't mapping all out, and then eventually got to the point where when they actually did the math, they're losing so much money, and now they're out of business. They're massive, like
Yeah.
massive person out there, and so yeah, it is very
Dude, let
interesting
me
how
give you a real example of this.
yeah.
So, in financial modeling, and let me be extremely clear for the listeners, like we're about to talk about high ticket sales. This is about high ticket sales ops. I'm not like trying to take us down a boring accounting rabbit hole, but this is the power of this stuff. So you're Josh Low Ticket Gavin. I don't know if they could see your name.
Yeah.
I jokingly wanted to put Josh High Ticket Troy.
Yeah, he shut up. He
but
shut up.
but I do have a low ticket funnel running right now, right?
Yeah.
And well, we have lots if you consider all the offers, but specifically, I was on a call yesterday reviewing the data against the financial model and the targets that we have set. And we were talking about what it would look like if we changed the price of the low ticket, right? Now, how much a model changes based on an adjustment is what's known in the financial modeling world as sensitivity. The sensitivity is so extremely high that literally the difference between us changing the price like $10 or $20 was the difference between drastically lowering our net CPA and doubling our CPA. Do you see how interesting that is? Like if we lowered, let's just say for an example, it's a $47 price point on the front end. If we lowered that to $37, it would drop our CPA, which was good. But if we lowered it all the way to like $17, which is only like $10 more, the CPA doubled because with the amount of velocity coming through the funnel, we weren't liquidating enough. So, okay, Joshua, what's the main point of that? Just to land this real quick. Without doing that financial model, I literally would have made a decision that cost us a shitload of money without even knowing it.
True. But then I'm sure people are wondering, listening, they're like, okay, well, how do I'm in the spreadsheet and you can throw any number in there. And I used to think like, well, I should just go out there and test and get data. So I actually get real life examples. So I can sit in there and be like, oh, my upsell is going to be a 20% take rate and just say that but then realistically it could be like 10%. So how do you know which benchmarks to start with when you're playing with dropping to 37 or even lower, where the percentage and the benchmarks of the KPI is coming from, especially if you're new or just starting out, or obviously
great question. And it's not maybe the best answer, but it's the right answer is that, and we always say that you have industry like baseline benchmark assumptions, and then you have brand specific metrics. To your point, it takes a while to actually see what your brand specific metrics are, but you have to have a baseline that's realistic for the industry, the type of offer you have, the type of funnel. This stuff varies drastically industry to industry. For me, for us and my company, I have a financial model with the industry benchmark assumptions for every single funnel. VSL, low ticket offer, webinar to book a call, webinar to low ticket to ascension. I have all of those because I've sold on all these funnels across a lot of brands for a lot of years. If you're just starting off and you don't have that, the best thing to do is to just ask somebody that has success there
Yeah.
and get their best guess. You are still only guessing, but you'll have a better guess.
Hmm.
That's it. CPMs, by the way, you could usually look up in like the ad manager or the,
Yeah.
you could find that data. So your CPM to start with, you can get that information. Everything else, you have to find the industry benchmarks. And in our industry, like in other industries, Josh, sorry, this is a long-winded answer, but in
No, that's
other
good.
industries,
Go.
you could go to websites like Statista or Statistia, however you say that. There's so many different websites you could go to get industry data. And like if somebody's starting with a new business plan, they often do so. We don't have that to the level that you would want it, and it's kind of a waste of time. So I would just
Yeah.
say find someone that's had success in our space and ask what their best guess is and start with that, optimize against it.
That's good. That makes sense. What are some numbers in, let's say, a high ticket call booking funnel, for example, that people don't factor into their financial model? Or I'd say when I say numbers, more so
Yeah.
expenses that people don't think about, or hitting costs, or like you said, most people don't think about, oh, my rep can only take X amount of calls this month, so I need a new rep. What else do
Mm.
people usually forget to track in their financial model for a call booking funnel?
Okay. I'm so glad you asked that question because there's a couple things I'm really passionate about, and I'm going to talk through a couple of them on that.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to tell you what they are, and then I'll explain each independently. The first thing that most people miss is having different assumption sets. Okay. I'm going to
Mm.
explain what that means in a second. Different assumption sets, specifically for ramping sales reps. The second thing is not building true activity models to properly identify capacity. I'm going to break down both. Now, here's what I mean. If you build a spreadsheet, right, and you have a financial model that literally just shows here's the ad spend, you'll have all the individual stage metrics, but to summarize it, it's like this is the ad spend, this is the cost per call, this is the amount of calls, this is how many calls each rep can make or take. All right, this is how many reps we need, right? That's the model. And then not only that, sorry, it says what's the actual show up rate, what's
Yeah.
the close rate, what's the average sales price that shows the revenue. If you have that, let's say you have one sales rep, right? Or two, it doesn't matter how many, plug that number in with whatever's right for your business, but let's say it's one, and you're modeling something out to see what it would look like to get to five. Well, what do? You would increase the ad spend until it shows you how much lead flow five reps can handle. But
Mm.
here's the issue, Josh. Here's the biggest issue when I'm referring to different assumption sets. That would assume if you're, let's say that the target close rate you have in there is 20%, 25%, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Well, that would assume that every single person you hire performs at that exact same rate in this linear fashion that never changes.
Yeah, true.
But I'll tell you this, I've ran sales operations for a long time and we have a lot of sales reps. It's going to take 60 to 90 days for that rep to become stabilized. So what I'll have two different assumption sets that show
Mm.
this is the close rate assumption for a stabilized rep. This is the close rate assumption for a non-stabilized rep, which is going to be much lower than that.
Mm.
So it's so important because
Yeah.
now you're like, oh shit, the ROAS goes down quite a bit when we're ramping, and the profitability goes down quite a bit when we're ramping. That is
True.
so important, and I'm going to tell you the reason it's the most important. Most people, when they're having challenges with ramping sales reps,
Hmm.
it's because they don't do what I just said. They scale up ad spend and they think something's going horribly wrong because they go, what the hell? Our ROAS is dropping and our profitability is dropping. They assume it's the lead quality went down, or they
Yeah.
assume something's wrong, not realizing that is a completely normal and necessary process to scale because there's a ramping phase which will cause them to
Yeah.
perform at a different close rate.
Yeah. Huh. Dude, that's good. It's so crazy. I've been in this space for almost really 9, 10 years, and nobody has ever told me something like this before. When I was in call funnels, nobody. I've been in all the programs that taught it. No one's
Yep.
ever brought that up. And I mean, talking like big, like I've been at events with like the people we think are the top in remote sales are teaching. And they never tell you to play out those numbers. You just have a basic Google sheet, and it's like your close rate's always gonna be 20%, and
Right.
like that's it. And then It just
And,
breaks.
and I think, I'm not taking anything away from these people. I don't even know who you're
Yeah, yeah,
referring to, but the
exactly.
point is like, because a lot of this stuff is taught in theory, even if they have really good numbers and they're doing it for themselves, one, like, I have visibility in so many different brands that we're
True.
running. What happens is you only gain this extreme level of insight being so deep in the trenches and seeing the same issues occur so many times that you start to identify a trend and then really analyze what's causing that trend. So I'm like, over the years, it's like every time we go to ramp, things like break, but it's like the ad spend or the ad costs are the same. Like I can't measurably feel a
Yeah.
difference from the lead quality listening to calls. That's when you start to realize that stuff. You're like, well, hold on
Mm.
a second. Oh, and by the way, a lot of people don't have the level of reporting to see the individual rep metrics.
Mm.
So it's all around. It's all about
Yeah, yeah.
understanding the story. But Josh, this is what sometimes we're an outsourced sales agency, as you know. Sometimes we'll take on a client, and they'll say, "Dude, we've sat at 300 for 6 months, and every time we try to scale up, like we'll scale to 400, but our ROAS will go down, our profitability will go down the next month, so we'll scale right back down." And I'm like, they don't know that I know in that moment when they say it to me, but in my head, I'm like, this is going to be easy because I know now we take
Yeah.
them on. The second they feel that way, I explain what I just explained to you. I said, no, 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 no. We're going to do nothing different. We're going to let it ride. We're going to sit with it 30, 60, 90 days. We're going to do the same exact thing. And all of a sudden, you'll see the profitability and the ROAS goes up. And then it does. And so it's like we come in and it's like 300, 400, 550, whatever it is, month over month. All they were missing is they didn't account for the fact that the reps are going to perform differently the first 60 days.
How, I guess my mind goes to, if we know that new reps are going to take 60 to 90 days to ramp up, or yeah, I think that's what you said. Um, is there a way to prepare, speed that up, maybe have reps training behind the scenes? So like if like you're trying to scale aggressively, maybe you don't have 60, 90 days. Is there a way you can speed that up, or have you had to do that, or you just accept it and you just
Yeah,
understand that?
good question. I want to, just because I hate to be incomplete. And for
Yeah.
listeners, there might be some people that are like, you didn't mention the second thing.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah.
the first, so we'll come back to that, but the first thing was the assumption set in the financial model. The second thing was the activity model and capacity. Let me answer your question. I'll circle back to the capacity. So the first thing is it, and this is why financial models again are important, because if you build that out properly and you see what that means for your business, and you say,
Mm-hmm.
whoa, that's too high of a risk profile, or I don't have that risk appetite right now, I don't want to drop that much in profitability, then you can decide your acceptable level of scale. So,
Mm-hmm.
for example, Josh, we have had clients where they're like, add 5 new reps next month. And I'll tell them, no problem, piece of cake. We hire a lot of sales reps, no issue. But I want you to know you currently have 5 sales reps. That
Mm-hmm.
means 50% of your team is going to perform at this way lower rate. That is a
Mm.
pretty big impact. If they just added
Ah,
1 rep, there's only 1 rep that has that much lower ramping rate. It doesn't affect it as much. So when you're modeling out, you can make those decisions and you can decide on your own, again, risk appetite or reinvestment strategy, because people need to remember a performance delta. Again, that's the difference between underperformance and KPI.
yep.
Performance delta needs to be considered as a reinvestment cost because it is. You can't
Yeah.
skip it, you can't bypass it. All you can control is how much of it you're willing to endure in any given period of time. So if you don't want to go through that in a big way, you could only hire 1 rep at a time,
Mm.
right? And
True.
so and then the question becomes, you said, can you prepare for that? Can you train more?
Yeah, yeah.
Closing is a kinetic motion. All right. So when you ramp somebody up on an offer, you can give them all the training in the world, but oftentimes you'll hit this inflection point where they will almost start going down without being able to implement in real time. They can't retain all that information without implementing it.
True. True.
So the short answer is no. The only thing you can do is limit the amount of calls that they take in that ramping period, because they're getting the shots and having the time to consistently train.
Yeah.
So maybe you give them 3 or 4 calls a day when they're in ramping instead of 8 to 10 right off the bat.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's
Right.
smart.
So these are the levers you could play with. Now,
Yeah.
going back though to the second thing you said, we're talking about people do wrong in these financial models.
Yep.
In the absence of them, they don't understand true capacity. So they do things that they force lower levels of performance by not realizing that they're overworking people. And so here's an example. First of all, I want to clarify there's financial models which speak to economics, and then there's something called an activity model. You still build it in a spreadsheet, but the goal is to not see financials, it's to back into like capacity, like how much time do these things take. So if you built an activity model for a closer, you would realize that let's say that they're working for 8 hours a day
Yeah.
and your calls are an hour. Most people are like, okay, perfect, we're going to give them 8 calls. But what they don't realize is, well, they have pipeline management they need to do, which takes time. They have follow-up calls that they need to do, which are more calls that you have to block out.
Yep.
And you have syncs that are on your calendar. You have trainings that's regularly happening. They don't have any of that factored. So here's the actual impact of what happens. They just give them 8 calls a day. Your reps will almost never tell you it's wrong because they want as many as they can. And what will happen is they don't have enough time in the day to set their follow-ups in a very short window of time. So they schedule them out far, which is why you'll get such a high ghost rate, because speed to close is so much lower. They're not realizing how much revenue they're leaving on the table by not having the open calendar space to prioritize the revenue. So to just make that a more succinct answer and to summarize it, if you're not building these models, you don't know how much the capacity is. You're giving them too many first calls, not realizing they would actually make more revenue with less first calls. It's efficiency.
True. That makes sense. That makes sense. What is then, like, for people wondering, because you said ask somebody who knows, has experience, I'm going to ask you, what is the activity limit for the average closer that you should plan for? Like how many calls they can take, if you're selling a high ticket offer, I don't know, fitness or biz op, I don't know if it changes per industry, the length of the calls and how much, but what does that benchmark normally look like across the accounts you're on?
So I'm going to give you an answer, but what's more important is I explain the logic behind the model, because people are going to be able to do more with that.
Yeah, perfect.
Because it varies so drastically, and I'll tell you what it varies on. It depends on the call model. Is it a 1-call close? Is it a 2-call close? Is it a 50-minute triage? Is the setter taking the triage? Is it a 30-minute call or an hour call? Do you need multiple follow-up calls on average because of the thing that you're selling? So the basic principles that you need to do is you write a list of the main tasks that take up their time. That's what you have to start with. All the things that take up their time. And you have to figure out what those proper ratios are to answer that question. So let's say it's a 45-minute, 1-hour call. Usually it's 5 to 6 new calls we see a day without performance starting to drop, right? Because if you have 5 new calls a day, 5 of your hours are gone. Well, let's assume that you have about 20% of them or 30% of them that go to a follow-up call. That means every 5 hours, 30% of them will require another 2 hours. Well, if 5 hours of the day was taken for new calls, let's assume 1 hour a day for pipeline management, then the other 2 hours or so can be reserved for those follow-up calls. Make sense how I back into that?
Yep.
So that's what I'm constantly looking at. And then you also have to determine what needs to have its own time block and what can be backfilled. So pipeline management, I know, and I know I just said it differently in this example, but pipeline management, it has to be done every day. There needs to be a certain amount of time spent on it. but it doesn't necessarily need to be done at a certain time. So usually we don't block time for that. They do that when they have no shows, because the industry average 30 to 40% of their calls are going to no show. So they're
True.
going to have enough time to do the pipeline management when they're not on those calls. Follow-up calls, though, it doesn't work like that. You can't like be like, hey, my guy no showed. Can you jump on now for your closing call? You have to have
True.
it scheduled. So you need to figure out like what has to be time blocked and what can be backfilled. And that's how you find the maximum efficiency.
Mm. And then when it comes to the marketing team, like when you're working with the marketing team, when you said like, okay, they have 5 existing reps, and they're like, we want to add on 5 more, and you're like, okay, well, 50% of the team is going to perform lower. Do you also have to let them know, like, hey, that means we have 50, like we have double, we need to fill 2 times more we're already filling calendar wise, so you have to increase spend then to keep up? Does that change as
Every
well?
single day.
Yeah.
Every single day. It's in our management playbook. The very first thing you do when you log on is you pull the lead report and you send it to the brand. And
Mm.
so it's just 2 metrics. It's lead flow versus capacity. Hey, we have 50. So let's just pretend that you have 6 calls a day a closer can take, and you have 10 closers for easy math.
Yep.
Your capacity is 60. And then let's say that, they booked 50 calls that day. You'd send, hey, our capacity 60, you book 50. We need to increase that lead flow. Now, in media buying, it's almost impossible to hit it perfectly.
Yeah.
Variables change, ad costs fluctuate. Like, you're not going to hit it perfectly. The point of the conversation isn't to attempt to be perfect. The point of the conversation is that the main thing to maximize revenue capacity is looked at on a daily basis. So we are always having conversations around it.
Mm.
And there's one, and here's why. We have something we call the golden formula, because it is the easiest formula that explains how to scale. Lead flow times sales performance equals revenue. That's it, dude. And what I'll tell you is that so much of the time people don't hit their revenue targets. It's because they don't even start with the proper inputs, which is lead
Mm.
flow. If you have a $1,000 collected dollar per booked call, that means you need 100 calls, or sorry, 1,000 calls, I think it is, to hit $1 million a month.
Mm.
Right? Well,
Yeah.
you know how many times people are like, why aren't we hitting $1 million a call? Like, let's close harder. Let's this, let's that. And I'm like, dude, you have 700 calls. Generate 300 more calls. We'll get you it.
Yeah.
So it's such a simple equation, but it keeps both sides committed to the revenue target.
Yeah. I like that because I feel like growing up in this game and not being taught that, or I used to be around people where everyone was like, I want a lower cost per call. We're just fighting on like lowering the costs and being afraid to scale and spending more. But then the more I mature, the more I realize the killers are like, no, let's continue to increase it and just make sure the rest of the math works out. It's just volume, and then let's make sure that we're converting this lead flow so that we can reinvest it. But again, that can't happen with the financial model. And what I like about the financial model is it does give you a lot more peace. Like I went after the event, I went home and I mapped out our financial model for our webinar funnel, and I realized we would not be profitable if we ran at the same one. And so we increased the price of the product. There's other things we changed the economics in the back end to get to the place where we can. And then I had like a target where now I log in. I'm like, okay, our allowable CP or cost per lead is $10. Our allowable, cost per whatever. I have it like mapped out so I can instantly know if we're in the red, or in the
Yep.
green. But that gives you so much peace. So I'm like, okay, I log in. Okay, awesome. That means we keep doing what we're doing.
Yeah.
We're good. And it's like it's interesting because I had this epiphany, or what I tell myself now is like marketing is math, and I used to think
That's it,
mark.
dude. I've said
It's
that for a
like,
long time.
yeah, man, I even heard you say that at the event. It just finally came to me. I used to think it was the copy and this. I'm like, dude, it's math. And obviously, yes, you need the copy, you need the offer. But again, the math will tell you if your copy's not good. And the math will tell you if your offer's not good.
To do the marketing, you have to do creative and
Yep.
copy and messaging and design, all this shit. To manage the marketing, just give
Mm,
me a spreadsheet and show me the actual metrics against the targets, and I'll tell you what to optimize.
yeah.
You just need
Yeah.
a spread. I mean, that's literally it. I look at a spreadsheet, I look at the targets, I know where I need to be, and I'm like, okay, well, that's underperforming. That's the thing that you got to create a split test on. That's the thing that you have to optimize for this week.
True.
But But going back to what you just said, I also want to be clear for anyone on here now, people that have scaled fast, and maybe you're an 8-figure business. I know you have some sophisticated listeners, and those are the
Yep.
people I love talking to, because I like the nerdy shit, right?
Yeah.
I like an inch wide and a mile deep. I don't like to be
It's
fluffy. It's not my
it's so
style.
funny. Like the more, like the bigger the people you talk to, the people who make more money, the less you get out into, like, you're not talking about the copy, the creative, and the funnel. It's like the tech, the marketing operations, and
Yeah.
tracking, and like, dude, that's like what is required to keep up and to measure those big
That's
companies. So
the
yeah.
fun stuff. That's the needle movers. And
Yep.
but I will say, even for people that are newer or lower revenue levels, the what I'm not saying is scale even if you're not making money. And I want to be really clear on that, because people could be like, well, I heard blah 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 say on a podcast. Like, I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
But here's what is interesting. I'll never tell anybody what to do with their money, but I'll share with you the thing that I would look at. If you do not have your marketing costs under control based on your financial models, and you don't have good lead quality under control, the worst thing you could do is start aggressively scaling. You don't have validation in the marketing funnel. But I'm not saying this to defend salespeople. All we do all day long is figure out how to do better. But if your marketing is solid, the cost per call is right in alignment where it needs to be, your marketing metrics look good, and the lead quality is good, and the only thing that you really want to improve is sales performance,
Yeah.
here's what I would challenge you to do. Because people, they leave so much freaking money on the table by saying this. They say, well, I'm not going to scale until we're at 20% close rate and we're at 15% close rate. But here's the thing. Imagine you're still making money though, and you're profitable.
Yeah.
Do you want to strive to improve? Of course. But you're still making profitable. You're still profitable. Guess what? More is still more.
Yeah. True.
So you're going to continue to work on improving those sales metrics, but why would we stop scaling? So let's just assume that the difference between a 15% close rate and a 20% close rate is the difference between a 5x ROAS and a 3.5x ROAS. I'm just making
Yep.
stuff up. Okay, fine. Let's keep striving for the 5. But if you're profitable on the 3.5, you can still be netting way more profit month over month by scaling up.
True.
And so the number one ratio I look at is cost per call. You heard me talk about this at the event.
Yep.
Against collected dollar per booked call. And by the way, it's just another way of looking at ROAS, but
Yeah.
looking at the call economics instead of just saying ad spend versus revenue. So, for example, if you're paying $150 for a call, for a booked call,
Yeah.
then you need, and you want a 4x ROAS, you need to pull $600 out of every booked call. So we are in, and that's how you optimize ROAS on an individual rep level, because we look at this metric on each rep, and we can see the ROAS that every rep is generating for us. But if we're hitting the minimum level, keep scaling. Let us keep working on the training, but keep scaling. You'll make more money.
Does that also help you identify how much cash you're collecting on the phone upfront versus payment plans and things like that? Like, do you maybe change what you're doing on the phone based on that? Like, okay, we're only collecting this much per call, or does that mean that people are defaulting to payment plans a lot then, or like, does that also give that indicator there?
Absolutely.
Okay,
So
that makes sense.
So what you're saying, which you're totally right to ask, is like, well, does that metric inform us on things we need to do differently with the reps? So let me tell you something. We have these main metrics that everybody looks at, right? Like close rate, revenue, collection rate, whatever. I like keystone metrics where one metric tells me almost the whole story. And so, the amount of times that we've had clients come into our, they came to hire us and they told me, they said, Josh, this is our best closer. And then we get into the business and we peel back the curtain and we realize we're like, whoa, this is not even close to this person's best closer. It happens all the time. Here's why. They're looking at gross revenue from the rep or close rate. But gross revenue, maybe they just took twice as many calls as other reps. right?
True.
If you look at close rate, well, maybe their show up was way lower though. Or
Hmm.
what if they had a bunch of bullshit payment plans? Or what if they had a way lower average sales price if you have multiple different offers? So it's very misleading. Collected dollar per booked call takes into consideration all of that.
Hmm.
It's lead to close percentage, not just live call to close, it's lead to close. So it factors in show rate, it's close rate, it's average sales price, and it's collection rate. So that really shows the true efficiency of a sales rep. And by the way, this is why I literally preach this. Get away from managing your sales teams by hammering close rate. It is not the most important metric. Collected dollar per booked call is.
Hmm.
Because you could, dude, you can have higher close rates and be generating less money for the business.
True, because you could just be freaking. They could be shilling like they feel like I need to close this deal, so I'm going to get them on like a cheap payment plan or anything possible, and then that's a close. So then their rate it goes up, and we're not. Yeah, that's true.
Exactly. And so we don't, something we don't do is like cross sell. There's a lack of alignment. It changed the entire partnership dynamic that we have to like a transactional competition where we're not aligned on incentives. So we hate it. But back in the day when we first started the company, we did. And that's how we won a lot of our deals.
Hmm.
It was really interesting. There was one engagement where that was the exact case. They were
Hmm.
actually beating our close rate, but we made way more money. Especially, in terms of ROAS and collected revenue. And the main reasons, there's only a few. They were selling tons of 12-month payment plans. We didn't even let our reps sell 12-month payment plans. I think the longest we had was a 4-month pay plan. And then our average sales price we were hitting was around 13. I still remember this like it was yesterday. This is a few years ago. It was like 13 grand was our average sales price, and theirs
Yeah.
was, I don't remember theirs as clearly, but I want to say it was like 6 or 7.
Dang.
So their close rate was higher, but dude, they were selling the $5,000 program on 12-month pay terms. We're going for the 15 grand to 10 grand
Yeah.
average sales price, and we were collecting 80% on average up front.
Yeah.
That's what matters, not close rate alone.
That's so cool. No one's ever said that, or I've never heard that before. Obviously the event, but yeah, nobody. Everyone's always like close rate. Oh, it's your close rate, 20% close rate. And it's like people flex that. It's like it's like a status symbol because that's what people think
Yeah.
matters. But at
It's just
scale,
not a sophisticated metric, but it also really hurts them because
yeah,
like, dude, there's some funnels where like you'll just never have that high of a close rate,
true.
but like you could be super profitable with a much lower close rate. But they don't do the math to realize that, so they just leave a lot of money on the table again.
I'm gonna.
Want me to give a quick example of that?
Yeah, go ahead.
We sold a $50,000 to $100,000 program. We only closed at like 4 or 5%, but based on the cost per call and based on the average sales price being 50 to 100,000, the ROAS was significant.
What
Like
was?
if I didn't have all of that knowledge, somebody else would be like, "Oh, the sales team's shitting the bed." No, it was
Yeah.
a very sophisticated avatar that had real qualifications, and it was a very hard sale. But we can still make the economics work with that. So you just have to understand the whole equation is the point.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, I'm gonna shift it a little bit here to pricing because like I was talking financial
Yep.
models, so pricing of offers I know is important. So, but I want to talk about like female versus male, selling to females, male. How you price your high ticket offers change? Does it change? Does it matter? Do you have experience in the female industry versus male industry? What have you seen?
I've never been asked that question, and that's an
Hmm.
interesting one. You're asking, do we change our offer pricing based on the audience we're selling to?
Yeah, if
Yeah.
one example would be gender, or obviously, I mean, there are other criteria where you might change it, but that's one that I
Yeah, we,
find
we
is
we've never
interesting.
changed. We've never made a
Okay.
pricing decision based on gender.
Yep.
We have completely changed the selling style based on gender because that matters.
Gotcha.
Um,
What changes male to female, the selling style? Just
usually
like bird's
softer
eye view.
selling skills.
Yeah.
Um, like men, uh, men can react positively in a way that's favorable and conducive to a sale by challenging them a little bit, and making them, really own the results and like, I could do that. Um, a
Yeah.
lot of the times women feel like that's maybe aggressive to challenge
Yeah.
them, right?
True.
Um, and I'm just speaking in like,
Yeah.
it's not every woman, but that
Yeah.
happens. And it's like, we've sold on like some really heartfelt female brands that just has a much softer avatar, and I could take a rep that's like not really aggressive at all but came off as aggressive. Like, I would even say that the way I talk can feel aggressive to a softer avatar.
For
And
sure.
I don't have an aggressive pushy sales style at all, but
Yeah.
I'm
No.
like, I have a swift delivery, I talk a little bit faster, I enunciate more. That's what I mean by selling style. That can feel a little
True.
bit more like sales resistance y, where other people that are more laid back, they have calmer, slower tonality, can work better for that avatar. So we study things like that.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Um, well, cool, dude. I appreciate you breaking this down. I got to hop here and head. I wish I could talk for so much longer. It's wedding season, and so got to
Yeah.
head here. But I know people can find you, obviously on Instagram at Josh Troy,
Yep.
and then you for outsourced sales. I know that you have. Are you still taking on clients? I'm sure you're busy,
Yeah.
but the
Oh, man, I'll say a
W,
couple things. So my
yeah,
Instagram's actually troy.joshua. They could, find me on Instagram. I'm always looking for clients,
yep,
but we're also always only taking on the right ones.
yeah, of course,
So
it's the
it
best.
just depends. Because of the fact that I do understand this stuff at a deep level, I don't even call it sales when I'm talking to a potential new account or relationship. I look at it as underwriting. Like, I am underwriting the economics of the deal, the
True,
probability of the relationship, the scalability of the offer and the solution. So I look at a lot of those things.
smart.
Um, but I love to have the conversation no matter what, to see if it's something we could help with. And the only thing outside of that is literally I'm leaving here to go to a studio to start filming YouTube content, like I told you.
Hey, let's
So
go. Got to
depending on
start
when they
it.
watch this, I'm going to start putting out some long form content,
Let's go.
which
I'll
I'm
make sure to
excited
link
for.
that.
So if you're listening and hearing that, keep checking back to see if I have my channel up yet.
Yes, sir. Yeah, you'll have to send me a link. I'll make sure it's below. But dude, I appreciate it. There's a couple offers in our pipeline that I hope we can that meet your requirements, get your team on it. So hopefully we can work together very soon here. And dude, what you're sharing is awesome. And I hope you'll listen to it because no one else has talked about it. It's really changing the way I've looked at marketing and these models. So keep doing what you're doing.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Josh. Talk soon.